Hey guys, this is Michael Ramirez back from I think I'm now in week 6 at San Diego Code School's full stack program. Um, feeling pretty feeling pretty good, but also feeling like I don't know. It's just hard for me to believe that I'm already on week 6 in the curriculum. I feel like it's kind of been like a little bit of a time warp for me. But nonetheless, I think last time I had been talking to you guys, I was working on, I think, React, and I was working on a project called VSTDA, as well as, I believe, a hackathon project that I had to do after that. So if I didn't touch base on that yet, the hackathon was essentially a project where you had to pick and choose some APIs that you want to utilize, and you'll build out your own React application in combination with like an Express server and using Node and stuff like that to pretty much create your app. So everybody does something different for the hackathon, which I think is pretty cool because you essentially get the choice of picking and choosing the APIs that you want to do, right? So in my case, I had chose like an API for YouTube, so I decided to use that instead, and I felt like it came out pretty good. And that was essentially the end of my last app, no, last project for React. So since then, I had been working on the next module after that, which was the Ops 200 module, and that involved essentially writing test cases and unit tests, as well as like end-to-end tests. I actually found that module pretty interesting because after reading, we were using Mocha and Chai first of all to write out these test cases, and I actually found it interesting based on how you actually compile and put together test cases in the first place. Because I think when you have an application, you're building it out. It seems straightforward as to like what the application is doing, but then it's always interesting in coming with certain test cases that are going to validate the functionality of that application, right? So um, one of the biggest challenges that I had faced this week was actually having to do with like writing those test cases, like thinking about what I actually wanted to test, as well as how to actually go about testing it. And one thing I will say for sure is like the Mocha documentation was great and really extensive in covering a lot of ways to implement a test as well as how to do it. But nonetheless, I still found it challenging as far as writing my end-to-end tests and as well as some of the unit tests. And also going through and just generally understanding what each line in my test code is doing. So that was definitely one of my challenges for me. Was also a challenge to the hackathon project for React. Um, I'm now starting to work on DB100 because I had just finished Ops 200 yesterday. So I'm going to be working with like MySQL, SQL queries, and eventually NoSQL as well. But my last goal that I actually had was literally just to finish up, I think, my VST project from the React, as well as like get through the hackathon. Um, and I think my biggest challenge was literally just being able to literally just build out the application and just like get it deployed correctly, and like thinking about how I wanted to create the application in the first place. So but even then, even after like figuring it out, just like wiring it up to work properly was also challenging within itself, right? Because I felt like for me, I felt like React actually has some parts to it that are very abstract as far as like learning how the functionality works and how you wire up a React application with multiple components and things of that nature. So I still find it even challenging even now, but I'm glad I got through it, and I was able to get through it just by, I think just being persistent. I think that's always the biggest advice that I always give other people, and I always try to tell myself is just if I get stuck, just keep on just being persistent on figuring out what I'm doing wrong, and then if I can't figure it out, maybe like step away for like a few minutes and maybe come back to it, and that usually definitely helps a lot because it kind of gives me like a new fresh perspective as to like how I need to go about retackling the same issue I was just dealing with. And so that's definitely an important thing. um, the most important new thing that I learned this week was like actually learning um, about writing those test cases with Mocha and Chai for JavaScript. So I actually found it pretty cool as far as like learning how to create those tests, as well as like understanding the fundamental difference between what unit tests are versus like what end-to-end tests are, what are integration tests, things of that nature. So I felt like that was super crazy helpful because now in the future, if I'm ever looking at like a test doc where it has like Mocha and Chai, as far as like its syntax, then I can actually go about like really being able to understand what it's actually testing for, right? Versus like taking a wild guess as to what it's testing for. So I would probably have to say that was probably one of the most important things that I learned this week. And yeah, I just figured it out by just looking at the Mocha documentation. I literally looked at all the documentation under the getting started part of Mocha's webpage. Also took a look at all the information under getting started for Chai. It's a lot of information. I had to write a ton of it down, so I can kind of essentially condense that documentation into something that I can easily reference. And I would definitely say too, like my advice for anybody who's going over React and going over, test cases, unit tests, and end tests, especially with Mocha and Chai, is like just look at the documentation. Look at the documentation, and if you're still having trouble like understanding parts of it, like even with the documentation, then just Google it. You'll be surprised that you'll see people's examples, like on Stack Overflow or some other website, as to how they went about implementing a test case. So there's tons of resources out there. There's always resources all over Google. Or if you actually have access, if you're going to like this coding bootcamp, San Diego Code School, definitely ask people next to you who have already gone through that module. They might definitely know something that you don't know, and vice versa. So it's definitely a good way to learn as well, right? So definitely take it upon yourself to try to learn it on your own, but don't be shy to ask other people for help, because I think it's one of the most undervalued things that you can do is ask somebody else like how something was done or how they went about doing it, or asking a question as to what it's actually doing in the code. All that stuff is just crazy helpful. So that being said, I am essentially planning on trying to get through DB100, which is the first database module, covering MySQL, stuff like that. So right now I had just been covering SQL statements and things of that nature, and then pretty soon I'll be writing my own queries and doing things like that. Learning about subqueries, inner joins, outer joins, that kind of stuff. And then will be going over another module after that, which is called DB200. So it's essentially just like the second phase of databases and like learning about that aspect as well. So I can't talk about that module much yet, much at all yet, because I haven't reached it. But I'll definitely cover it more next week when I do my next video for week 7. But that being said, I definitely feel like I'm in a pretty good place right now. I enjoyed the mock programming session that we did this past Sunday. That was really cool. I worked on the front end team again and helped build out some of the functionality that we needed to do for an application that we're trying to build out for essentially like we're building out an application that will essentially take in a total number of students and essentially randomly pair them up with people based on like their skill level and how far they are into the curriculum, which I think is going to be super cool once it's fully done. But that's been an ongoing thing for the past couple of weeks. So if you want to if you're interested in learning more about that mob programming session, I actually had, I believe I discussed it a little bit more in my past couple of videos. So we're still working on that and building out the front end and back end functionality as far as like randomizing groups, building out that logic, right, for how it's going to do that, building out the front ends, building out, all the HTML and whatnot for that, as well as the JavaScript. So it's going pretty cool. I actually really enjoyed it. Coding challenges are always really solid too. Being able to do that on the weekends for the first hour of the day, both on Saturday and Sunday, I feel like that's another skill that I feel like is you just can't do it enough. I feel like it's the more you do it, just the better you're gonna get at it, and it's good because like you work on your like technical communication, you are able to diagram things out like visually on paper. It helps you in being able to explain technical things in like an easy to understand way to the person that you're being pair programmed with. And then also, of course, just like the plus of like just trying to solve the challenge, right? So all that stuff is just, I think, really good to do. I think a lot of people do code challenges, but I don't think people pair program as much as they probably should. And I would definitely recommend that if you have somebody to pair program with, definitely try to take advantage of that, because being able to pair program with somebody means you can talk about the code, you can relay your understanding of it, and most importantly, you can take in other people's perspectives and learn from other people at the same time, and they can learn from you too. So that being said, I'll talk to you guys next week for week 7.